Guidelines for questionnaire design. Questionnaire design principles should focus on their three areas. The first relates to the wording of the questions, the second refers to the planning of issues with regard to how the variables will be categorized, scaled, and coded after receipt of the responses. The third pertains to the general appearance of the questionnaire. All three are important issues in questionnaire design because they can minimize bias in research. Principles of wording. The principles of wording refer to such factors as the appropriateness of the content of the questions, how questions are worded, and the level of sophistication of the language used, the type and form of questions asked, the sequencing of the questions, the personal data sought from the respondents. Principles of wording. First, we have content and purpose of the questionnaires. The nature of the variable type, subjective feelings, or objective facts will determine what kind of questions are asked. If the variables type are of subjective nature, satisfaction or involvement, where respondents' beliefs, perceptions, and attitudes are measured, the question should tap the dimension of all elements of the concept. Language and wording of the questionnaire. The language of the questionnaire should approximate the level of understanding of the respondents. The choice of words will depend on their educational level, the usage of terms and idioms in the culture, and the frames of reference of the respondents. When designing a questionnaire, it is very important to consider the language used in the questions to ensure that it is appropriate for the respondent's level of understanding. The language should be easy to comprehend and reflect the education and literacy level of the target population. Types and form of questions. We have open ended questions and closed questions. Open ended questions allows respondents to answer them any way they choose. Example is asking the respondents to state five things that are interesting and challenging in the job. Open ended questions are useful in exploratory research or when the goal is to gain a deeper understanding of a particular phenomenon. They allow researchers to collect rich and detailed data that can be analyzed for themes and patterns, providing valuable insights into participants' attitudes, beliefs, and experiences. While closed questions ask the respondents to make choices among a set of alternatives given by the researcher. Instead of asking the respondent to state the five aspects of the job that she finds interesting and challenging, the researcher might list 10 to 15 aspects that might seem interesting or challenging in the job. Positively and negatively worded questions. Instead of praising all questions positively, it is advisable to include some negatively worded questions as well, so the tendency in respondents to mechanically circle the points toward one end of the scale is minimized. It is true that using positively worded questions can sometimes lead to response bias, where respondents may be more likely to agree or give positive responses even if they do not truly feel that way. Example, let us say that a set of six questions is used to tap the variable perceived success on a point scale, with one being very low and five being very high on the scale. A respondent who is not particularly interested in completing the questionnaire is more likely to stay involved and remain alert while answering the question when positively and negatively worded questions are interspersed in it. For instance, if the respondent has circled 5 for a positively worded questions such as, I feel I have been able to accomplish a number of different things in my job, he cannot circle number 5 again to the negatively worded questions, I do not feel I am very effective in the job. Including some negatively worded questions can help to balance out this bias as it forces respondents to think more critically about the question. Double barreled questions. A question that lends itself to different possible responses to its subpart is called a double barreled questions. These questions can be confusing and lead to inaccurate or incomplete responses because they force respondents to choose between two distinct concepts when they may only agree with one or the other or neither. In this case, it would be better to ask two questions. Do you think there is a good market for the product and that it will sell well? It could bring a yes response to the first part, and there is a good market for the product, and a no response for the latter part. In this case, it would be better to ask two questions. Do you think there is a good market for the product? And do you think the product will sell well? If we combine the two questions and ask a double barreled questions, we would confuse the respondents and obtain ambiguous response. Ambiguous questions. Even questions that are not double barreled might be ambiguously worded, and the respondent may not be sure what exactly they mean. Ambiguous questions are questions that are unclear or have more than one possible interpretations, making it difficult for respondents to understand what is being asked and provide accurate or consistent answers. Example, to what extent would you say you are happy? Respondents might find difficult to decide whether the question refers to their state of feelings in the workplace or at home or in general. Ambiguous questions have built-in bias in as much as different respondents might interpret such items in the questionnaire differently. Recall dependent questions. Some questions might require respondents to recall experiences from the past that are hazy in their memory. Answers to such questions might have bias. For instance, if an employee who has had 30 years service in the organization is asked to state when he first started working in a particular department for how long, these types of questions can be problematic because memory is valuable and prone to error. Respondents may difficulty accuracy recalling information, particularly if it happened a long time ago. A better source for obtaining the information would be the personal records. Leading questions. Questions should not be phrased in such a way that lead the respondents to give that the researchers would like to give. An example of such questions is: do you think that in these days of escalating cost of living, employees should be given good pay rises? By asking a leading question, we are signaling and pressuring respondents to say yes. To what extent do you agree the employee should given higher pay rises? These types of questions can be biased respondents' answers, as they may feel pressured to agree with the questions or may be influenced by the framing of the questions. To avoid leading question, it is important to phrase question in a neutral and objective manner without suggesting particular answer or viewpoint. Loaded questions. Another type of bias in questions occurs when they are phrased in an emotionally charged manner. An example of such a loaded question is asking employees, to what extent do you think management is likely to be vindictive if the union decides to go on strike? The words strike and vindictive are emotionally charged terms, polarizing management in unions. Hence, asking a question such as above would elicit strongly emotional and highly biased responses. To avoid bias due to emotionally charged language, it is important to praise questions without using overly dramatic or sensationalized language that could create an emotional response or bias the respondent's opinion. Social desirability. Questions should not be worded such that they elicit socially desirable responses. For instance, a question such as, do you think that older people should be laid off? Would elicit a response of no, mainly because society would frown on a person who said that elderly people should be fired even they are capable of performing the job satisfactorily. Different worded question with less pressure towards social desirability would be: there are advantages and disadvantages to retaining senior citizens in the workforce. To what extent do you think companies should continue to keep the elderly on their payroll? Social desirability is a bias in a way that they believe in a way that they believe will be viewed favorably by others rather than giving their honest opinion or response. Length of questions. As a rule of thumb, a question or a statement the questioner should not exceed 20 words or exceed one full line in print. Simple questions and short questions are preferable to long ones. Longer questions can be more difficult to understand, especially if they contain complex or technical language. This can lead to confusion or misinterpretation. Sequencing of questionnaire questions. The sequence of questions in the questionnaire should be such that the respondent is led from questions of a general nature to those that are more specific, and from questions that are relatively easy to answer to those that are progressively more difficult. In determining the sequence of questions, it is advisable not to place continuously a positively worded and a negatively worded question typing the same element or dimension of a concept. Like, for example, I have opportunities to interact with my colleagues during work hours. I have few opportunities to interact with my colleagues during work hours. Starting with generic questions that are easy to answer can help build rapport with the respondent and make them more comfortable. First, there is no need to ask the very same question in both a positive and a negative way. Second, if some reason this is deemed necessary, the two questions should be placed in different parts of the questionnaire. Classification data or personal information. Classification data, also known as personal information or demographic questions, elicit such information as age, educational level, marital status, and income. Unless absolutely necessary, it is best not to ask for the name of the respondent. If, however, the questioner has to be identified with the respondents for any reason, the questionnaire can be numbered and connected by the researcher to the respondent's name in a separately maintained private document. Questions seeking personal information should appear at the beginning or at the end of the questionnaire is a matter of choice for the researcher. Classification data plays an important role in a valuable source of information. So this is an example of a classification of data. Details of income or other highly sensitive information are best placed at the very end of the questionnaire. In surveys, it is advisable to gather certain demographic data such as age, educational level, job level, department, and number of years in the organization, even if the theoretical framework does not necessitate or include these variables. Principles of measurement. Appropriate scales have to be used depending on the type that need to be obtained. The different scaling mechanism that help us to anchor our scales appropriately should be properly used wherever possible. The interval and ratio scales should be used in preference to nominal or ordinal scales. Just as there are guidelines to be followed to ensure the wording of the questionnaire is appropriate to minimize bias. General appearance or get up of the questionnaire. An attractive and neat questionnaire with appropriate introduction, instructions, and well arrayed set of questions and response alternatives will make it easier to the respondents to answer them. A good introduction, a proper introduction that clearly discloses the identity of the researcher and conveys the purpose of the survey is absolutely necessary. It is also essential to establish some rapport with the respondents and motivate them to respond to the questions in the questionnaires wholeheartedly. Assurance of confidentiality of the information provided by them will allow for less biased answers. The introduction section should end on a courteous note, thanking the respondents for taking the time to respond the survey. The following is an example of appropriate introduction. Organizing questions, giving instructions and guidance in good alignment, organizing the questions logically, neatly, in appropriate sections, and providing instructions on how to complete the items in each section will help the respondents to answer them without difficulty. Questions should also be neatly aligned in a way that allows the respondent to complete the task of reading and answering the questionnaire by expending the least time and effort and without straining the eyes. A specimen of the portion of questionnaire incorporating the above points follows. Section 2, it talks about your work life example. This is the example of about your work life and how you experience your work life. Section 1, example about this is all about yourself. This is example, but the numbers representing the most appropriate responses for you in respect of the following items. Because many people believe that income is a significant factor in explaining the type of career decisions individual make, the following two questions are very important for this research. Like all other items in this questionnaire, the responses to these two questions will be kept confidential. Please circle the appropriate number that describe your positions. The questionnaire could include an open-ended questions at the end allowing respondents to comment on any aspect they choose. It should end with an expression of sincere thanks to respondents. The last part of the questionnaire could look as follows. Example: the questions in the survey may not be all embarrassing and comprehensive, and may not therefore have afforded you an opportunity to report some things you may want to say about your job, the organization, or yourself. Please make any additional comments needed in the space provided. How did you feel about completing this questionnaire? Check the pace in the following diagram that reflects your feelings. Concluding the questionnaire should end on a courteous note, reminding the respondent to check all the items have been completed as per the example below. Review of questionnaire design. Questionnaires are most useful as a data collection method, especially when large numbers of people are to be reached in different geographical regions. They are a popular method of collecting data because researchers can obtain information fairly easily, and the questionnaire responses are easily coded. Global research is now vastly facilitated by the internet. There are several ways of administering questions. Questions can be personally administered to respondents, electronically distributed to respondents. A link can be posted, a website, or a blog on your social network account. Pretesting of structured questions. Whether it is a structured interview where the questions are posed to the respondent in a predetermined order, or a questionnaire that is used in a survey, it is important to pretest the instrument to ensure that the questions are understood by the respondents. Because there may be ambiguity in the questions, and that there are no and you have to prioritize that there are no problems with the wording or measurement. It would be good to debrief of the results of the pretest and obtain additional information from the small group or participants on their general reactions to the questionnaire and how they felt about completing the instruments. It also involves the use of small number of respondents to test the appropriateness of the questions and their comprehensions. Electronic questionnaire and survey design. Electronic questionnaire are very popular at the moment also because electronic non-response rates may not be any lower than those for mail questionnaire. Even in the survey in progress, descriptive summaries of the cumulative data can be obtained either on the screen or in printed form. Electronic questions are very popular at the moment, also because electronic non-response rate may not be any lower than those mail questionnaires. With the increased computer literacy, we can expect electronic questionnaires administration to keep on growing in the future. And that would be all. Thank you.